Hello, thank you for joining me. Today, we will be reading some books involving some ruins that I've come across in my journey. It has been quite some time since you and I have sat down and I've had a chance to read to you, so I'm going to take advantage of the opportunity and I'm going to read to you. Alright, let's begin. The Ruins of Kemel-Ze, Part 1, by Roland Nordson. With the acclamations of the Fellows of the Imperial Society still ringing in my ears, I decided to return to Morrowind immediately. It was not without some regret that I bade farewell to the fleshpots of the Imperial City, but I knew that the wonders I had brought back from Raleigh Mackay had only scratched the surface of the Dwemer ruins in Morrowind. Even more spectacular treasures were out there, I felt, just waiting to be found, and I was eager to be off. I also had before me the solitary example of a poor bannerman who was still dining out on his single expedition to Blackmarsh 20 years ago. That would never be me, I vowed. With my letter from the Empress in hand, this time I would have the full cooperation of the Imperial authorities. No more need to worry about attacks from superstitious locals, but where should I look next? The ruins at Kemel-Ze were the obvious choice. Unlike Raleigh Mackay, getting to the ruins would not be a problem. Also known as the quote-unquote Cliff City, Kemel-Ze lies on the mainland side of the Vardenfell Rift, sprawling down the sheer coastal cliff. Travelers from the east coast of Vardenfell often visit the site by boat, and it can be reached overland from the nearby villages without undue hardship. Once my expedition had assembled in Seyda-Neen, with the usual tedious complications involved in operating in this half-civilized land, we set out for the village of Morog near the ruins, where we hoped to hire a party of diggers. My interpreter, Tuin Panay, an unusually jolly fellow for a dark elf, whom I had hired in Seyda-Neen at the recommendation of the local garrison commander, assured me that the local villagers would be very familiar with Kemel-Ze, having looted the site for generations. Incidentally, Tenpenny, as we soon came to call him to his constant amusement, proved invaluable, and I would recommend him without any hesitation to any of my colleagues who are planning similar expeditions to the wilds of Morrowind. At Morog, we ran into our first trouble. The hetman of the village, a reserved, elegant old fellow, seemed willing to cooperate, but the local priest, a representative of the absurd religion they have here, worshipping something called the Tribunal, who they claim actually live in palaces in Morrowind, was fervently against us excavating the ruins. He looked likely to sway the villagers to his side with his talk of quote-unquote religious taboos, but I waved the Empress's letter under his nose and mentioned something about my friend, the garrison commander at Seyda-Neen, and he quieted right down. No doubt this was just a standard negotiating tactic arranged among the villagers to increase their pay. In any event, once the priest had stalked off muttering to himself, no doubt calling down curses upon the heads of the foreign devils, we soon had a line of villagers eager to sign on to the expedition. While my assistant was working out the mundane details of contracts, supplies, etc., Master Oram and I rode on to the ruins. By land, they can only be reached using narrow paths that wind down the face of the cliff from above, where any misstep threatens to send one tumbling into the sea, foaming about the jagged rocks below. The city's original entrance to the surface must have been in the part of the city to the northeast, the part that fell into the sea long ago when an eruption of Merton Mountain created this mind-bogglingly vast crater. After successfully navigating the treacherous path, we found ourselves in a large chamber open to the sky on one side, disappearing to the darkness on the other. As we stepped forward, our boots crunched on piles of broken metal, as common in dwarven ruins as potsherds and other alien sites. This was obviously where the looters brought their finds from deeper levels, stripping off the valuable outer casings of the dwarven mechanisms and leaving their innards here, easier than lugging the intact mechanisms back up to the top of the cliff. I laughed to myself, thinking of the many warriors unwittingly walking around Tamriel with pieces of dwarven mechanisms on their backs. For that, of course, is what most quote-unquote dwarven armor really is, just the armored shells of ancient mechanical men. I sobered when I thought of how exceedingly valuable an intact mechanism would be. This place was obviously full of dwarven devices, judging from the litter covering the floor of this vast chamber. Or had been, I reminded myself. Looters had been working over the site for centuries. Just the casing alone would be worth a small fortune, sold as armor. Most dwarven armor is made from mismatched pieces from various devices, hence its reputation for being bulky and unwieldy. But a match set from an intact mechanism is worth more than its weight in gold, for all the pieces fit together smoothly, and the wearer hardly notices the bulk. Of course, I had no intention of destroying my finds for armor, no matter how valuable. I would bring it back to the Society for Scientific Study. I imagined the astonished cries of my colleagues as I unveiled it at my next lecture, and smiled again. The Ruins of Kemel-Ze, Part 2 by Roland Nordsen. I picked up a discarded gear from the piles at my feet. It still gleamed brightly, as if new made, the dwarven alloys resisting the corrosion of time. I wondered what secrets remained hidden in the maze of chambers that lay before me, defying the efforts of looters waiting to gleam again in the light they had not seen in long eons. Waiting for me, it remained only to find them. With an impatient gesture to Master Aram to follow, I strode forward into the gloom. Master Aram, Tenpenny, and I spent several days exploring the ruins while my assistant set up camp at the top of the cliff and hauled supplies and equipment from the village. I was looking for a promising area to begin excavation, a blocked passage or corridor untouched by looters that might lead to completely untouched areas of the ruins. We found two such areas early on, but soon discovered that the many winding passages bypassed the blockage and gave access to the rooms behind. Nevertheless, even these outer areas, for the most part stripped clean of artifacts by generations of looters, were full of interest to the professional archaeologist. Behind a massive bronze door, burst from its hinges by some ancient turmoil of the earth, we discovered a large chamber filled with exquisite wall carvings which impressed even the jaded Tenpenny, who claimed to have explored every dwarven ruin in Morrowind. They seemed to depict an ancient ritual of some kind, with a long line of classically bearded dwarven elders processing down the side walls, all seemingly bowing to the giant form of a god carved into the front wall of the chamber, which was caught in the act of stepping forth from the crater of a mountain in a cloud of smoke or steam. According to Master Aram, there are no known depictions of dwarven religious rituals, so this was an exciting find indeed. I set a team to work prying the carved panels from the wall, but they were unable to even crack the surface. On closer examination, the chamber appeared to be faced with a metallic substance with the texture and feel of stone impervious to any of our tools. I considered having Master Aram try his blasting magic on the walls, but decided that the risk of destroying the carvings was too great. Much as I would have preferred to bring them back to the Imperial City, I had to settle for taking some rubbings of the carvings. If my colleagues in the Society showed enough interest, I was sure a specialist could be found, perhaps a Master Alchemist, who could find a way to safely remove the panels. I found another curious room at the top of a long, winding stair, barely passable due to the fall of rubble from the roof. At the top of the stair was a domed chamber with a large ruined mechanism at its center. Painted constellations were still visible in some places on the surface of the dome. Master Aram and I agreed that this must have been some sort of observatory, and the mechanism was therefore the remains of a dwarven telescope. To remove it from ruins down the narrow stairway would require its complete disassembly, which fact no doubt had preserved it from the attention of looters. So I decided to leave it in place for the time being. The existence of this observatory suggested, however, that this room had once been above the surface. Closer examination of the structure revealed that this was indeed a building, not an excavated chamber. The only other doorways from the room were completely blocked, and careful measurements from the top of the cliff to the entry room and then to the observatory revealed that we were still more than 250 feet below our present ground level. A sobering reminder of the forgotten fury of Red Mountain. This discovery led us to focus our attentions downward. Since we now knew approximately where the ancient surface lay, we could rule out many of the higher blocked passages. One wide passage, impressively flanked with carven pillars, particularly drew my interest. It ended in a massive rockfall, but we could see where the looters had begun and then abandoned a tunnel through the debris. With my team of diggers and Master Aram's magery to assist, I believed we could succeed where our predecessors had failed. I therefore set my team of Dark Elves to work on clearing the passage, relieved finally to beginning the real exploration of Kemel-Ze. Soon, I hoped, my boots would be stirring up dust that had lain undisturbed since the dawn of time. With this exciting prospect before me, I may have driven my diggers a bit too hard. Tenpenny reported that they were beginning to grumble about the long days and that some were talking of quitting. Knowing from experience that nothing puts heart back into these dark elves like a taste of the lash, I had the ringleaders whipped and the rest confined to the ruins until they had finished clearing the passageway. Thanks Stendar for my foresight in requisitioning a few legionnaires from state of need. They were sullen at first, but with the promise of an extra day's wages when they broke through, they soon set to work with a will. While these measures may sound harsh to my readers back in the comforts of civilization, let me assure you that there is no other way to get these people to stick to a task. The Ruins of Kemel-Ze, Part 3, by Roland Nordsen. The blockage was much worse than I had first thought, and in the end it took almost 2 weeks to clear the passage. The diggers were as excited as I was when their picks finally broke through the far end into emptiness, and we shared a round of the local liquor together, a foul concoction in truth. The show that all was forgiven. I could hardly restrain my eagerness as they enlarged the hole to allow entry into the chamber beyond. Would the passage lead to an entire new level of this ancient city filled with artifacts left by the vanished dwarves? Or would it only be a dead end? Some side passage leading nowhere? My excitement grew as I slid through the hole and crouched for a moment in the darkness beyond. From the echoing sounds of the stones rattling beneath my feet, I was in a large room, perhaps very large. I stood up carefully and unhooded my lantern. As the light flooded the chamber, I looked around in astonishment. Here were wonders beyond even my wildest dreams. As the light from the lamp filled the chamber beyond the rockfall, I looked around in astonishment. Everywhere was the warm glitter of dwarven alloys. I had found an untouched section of the ancient city. My heart pounding with excitement, I looked around me. The room was vast. The roof soaring up into darkness beyond the reach of my lamp, the far end lost in shadows with only a tantalizing glimmer hinting at treasures not yet revealed. Along each wall stood rows of mechanical men, intact except for one oddity. Their heads had been ritually removed and placed on the floor at their feet. This could only mean one thing. I had discovered the tomb of a great dwarven noble, maybe even a king. Burials of this type had been discovered before, most famously by Ransom's expedition to Hammerfell, but no completely intact tomb had ever been found until now. But if this was such a royal burial, where was the tomb? I stepped forward gingerly, the rows of headless bodies standing silently as they had for eons, their disembodied eyes seeming to watch me as I passed. I had heard wild tales of the curse of the dwarves and had always laughed it off as superstition, but now, breathing the same air as the mysterious builders of this city, which had lain undisturbed since the cataclysm that spelled their doom, I felt a twinge of fear. There was some power here. I felt something malevolent that resented my presence. I stopped for a moment and listened. All was silent. Except, it seemed I heard a faint hiss, regular as breathing. I fought down a sudden surge of panic. I was unarmed, not thinking of danger in my haste to explore past the blocked passage. Sweat dripped down my face as I scanned the gloom for any movement. The room was warm. I suddenly noticed much warmer than the rest of the labyrinth thus far. My excitement returned. Could I have found a section of the city still connected to a functioning steam grid? Pipes ran along the walls, as in all sections of the city. I walked over and placed my hand on one. It was hot, almost too hot to touch. Now I saw that in places where the ancient piping had corroded, small jets of steam were escaping. The sound I had heard, of course. I laughed at my own credulity. I now advanced quickly to the far end of the room, giving a cheerful salute to the ranks of mechanical soldiers who had appeared so menacingly only moments before. I smiled with triumph as the light swept back the darkness of centuries to reveal the giant effigy of a dwarven king, standing on a raised dais, his metal hand clutching his rod of office. This was the prize indeed. I circled the dice slowly, admiring the craftsmanship of the ancient dwarves. The Golden King stood 20 feet tall under a freestanding domed cupola, his long, upswept beard jutting forward proudly as his glittering metal eyes seemed to follow me. But my superstitious mood had passed, and I gazed benevolently at the old dwarven king. My king, as I had already begun to think of him. I stepped onto the dice to get a better look at the sculpted armor. Suddenly, the eyes of the figure opened, and it raised a mailed fist to strike. I leaped to one side as the golden arm came crashing down, striking sparks from the steps where I had stood a moment before. With a hiss of steam and a whir of gears, the giant figure stepped ponderously out from under its canopy and strode toward me with frightening speed, its eyes tracking me as I scrambled backwards. I dodged behind a pillar as the fist whistled down again. I had dropped my lantern in the confusion, and now I crept into the darkness outside the pool of light, hoping to slip between the headless mechanisms and thus escape back to the safety of the passageway. Where had the monster gone? You would think that a 20-foot golden king would be hard to miss, but he was nowhere to be seen. The guttering lamp only illuminated a small part of the room. He could be hiding anywhere in the gloom. I crawled faster. Without warning, the dim ranks of dwarven soldiers in front of me went flying as the monstrous guardian loomed before me. He had cut off my escape. As I dodged backwards, blow after blow whistled down as the implacable machine followed me relentlessly, driving me into the far corner of the room. At last, there was nowhere left to go. My back was to the wall. I glared up at my foe, determined to die on my feet. The huge fist lifted for one final blow. The Ruins of Kemel-Ze, Part 4. by Roland Nordson. The room blazed with sudden light. Bolts of purple energy crackled across the metal carapace of the dwarven monster, and it halted, half turning to meet this new threat. Master Orim had come! I was about to raise a cheer when the giant figure turned back to me, unharmed by the lightning bolt hurled by Master Orim, determined to destroy this first intruder. I shouted out, "Steam! Steam!" as the giant raised his fist to crush me into the floor. There was a hiss and a gust of bitter cold, and I looked up. The monster was now covered with a shell of ice, frozen in the very moment of dispatching me. Master Orim had understood. I leaned against the wall with relief. The ice cracked above me. The giant golden king stood before me, the shell of ice falling away, his head swiveling towards me in triumph. Was there no stopping this dwarven monstrosity? But then the light faded from his eyes and his arms dropped to his sides. The magical frost had worked, cooling its steam-driven energy. As Master Orim and the diggers crowded around me, congratulating me on my narrow escape, my thoughts drifted. I imagined my return to the Imperial City, and I knew that this would be my greatest triumph yet. How could I possibly top this find? Perhaps it was time to move on, recovering the fabled Eye of Argonia. Now that would be a coup. I smiled to myself, reveling in the glory of the moment, but already planning my next adventure. Chronicles of Ehtelar, Volume 1. The caravan tracked its way through the hollow wastes. Wheels creaked below the howling of the desert winds. Mercenaries, swathed in chain and boiled leather, cursed the sweltering heat that broiled them under the unblinking sun. Hearing their muttered oaths, Ehtelar was thankful for Rahad, her trusted contact and sentinel. The burly Redguard was blessed with an unflappable practicality born of his upbringing in the desert wastes. "Dress lightly," he'd said. "Loosely woven tunics will be your friend in Alakir. Wearing much more will see you cooked in your shell faster than dreg shrimp in a fishmonger's pot." She had taken his advice to heart, dressing only in linens and investing in an enchanted waistband that kept her cool despite the oppressive heat. Trundling forward, the wagon train crested a windswept ridge and came to a rumbling halt. Curious, Ehtelar dismounted. As she made her way toward the front of the train, merchants confused by the sudden stop peered out from the awnings that kept the sun from their backs. "My friend," Rahad said as she passed the head carriage, "your travels have taken you to many shores, but tell me, have you ever encountered such a sight?" As he spoke, he gestured out past the road to the valley below. There, amid burnt stone and winding trails, great alabaster spires protruded from the sand like arrows fallen into thick sod, stretching for miles in the space between the ridge and its twin across the span. "What is it?" she asked, regaining her composure. "I was hoping you could tell me," he replied. "This pass is normally home to nothing but sand heaped in dunes for miles. Who can say how long that was buried here?" Realizing an opportunity to make a profit, Ehtelar insisted they camp among the ruins for the night. The mercenaries, glad for a reprieve from the noonday sun, were all too happy for a break from their grueling trek. Night fell and their carousing was heard into the early hours of the morning. If there were anything untoward about the ruins around them, it went unnoticed in the din. Dawn found Ehtelar and her companion picking a path through the spires in search of an entrance. It was almost noon before they found one. "Here!" Rahad cried out, excitement barely concealed beneath the deep timbre of his voice. "I found a way through!" Running now to reach her friend, see what he had found, Ehtelar rounded a bend in the stone. As she did, she was greeted by a terrible sight. Hanging limp from a great spear, thrust out from the crack was Rahad. His scabbard was empty, the sword that filled it thrust into a nearby dune. She stood there, gaping in horror, as Rahab was lifted into the air, a great scaly head emerging from the sand heaped in piles about the ruined doorway. With one fluid motion, the creature shifted its weight, throwing Rahad to one side as it began to clean the gore from its weapon. Ehtelar shook her head in disbelief. She thought to call out, but realized the creature would probably kill her before she issued a second syllable. Slowly, carefully, she took a step back, and then another. For a moment it seemed she would escape, but as her third step met ground, the creature turned. Dodging back from a thrust spear point, Ehtelar found her ears deafened by a sudden burst of shrill music. Clapping her hands over them defensively, she stumbled back as her adversary uncalled before her. Rising, expanding its ribs until it had nearly doubled in size, its multitional voice joined itself in chorus. Its shrieking harmony resounded through the sand until tiny grains fell away from the ruins in sheets. As it shifted, the stone beneath her collapsed, spilling her out toward her foe. It was all she could do to grab Rahad's sword, buried to the pommel in sand. Suddenly, within striking distance, she thrust the sword through the fiend's blackened maw. As steel met skull, the terrible crescendo of its voice began to falter. In that moment, her opponent realized a simple truth. It no longer hungered for blood and flesh. It no longer wanted much of anything at all. How wonderful, it thought as the ground rushed up to meet it. If its reptilian mouth allowed, it would have smiled. As the Lamia spiraled to the ground, its hooked spear caught Ehtelar in the calf, feeling the cold bite of steel as she was thrown off balance. For a moment, it seemed she would right herself, but the stone she stood upon suddenly gave way. Down into the dark she fell, suspended within a cloud of sand that swept past the jutting stones and crenellated spires peering out from the shadows below. As the bright desert sky abandoned her, she found herself bathed in scintillating light. A field of stars sparkled around her, not stars, for they were far underground. They were the bright crystals of the Aelia Dune. She fell for what seemed like days, her only company the flickering lights careening up at her from the darkness. If I could only grasp one of those tiny stars, she thought, her hands reaching toward them, I might become as ethereal as they are and leave this world behind. From below, a whisper grew to rustling, wind-like sound. Looking down, it seemed her flight of stars came to a hard edge, rushing up at her in the dark. Chronicles of Ehtelar, Volume 2. Ehtelar awoke in darkness, faint rivulets of falling sand powdering her brow. Memories of her short battle in the ruins above flashed through her mind. Rahad, the Redguard merchant who had accompanied her into the desert, was dead, taken unaware in the ruins above. His sword lay buried in the skull of the creature that did him in. She remembered the sickening crunch it made as steel met skull, the hideous scraping vibration in her arm as she drove it home. Then the ground had opened up, devouring the world to send her tumbling into the abyssal void below. How far had she fallen? And for how long? Sand, then stars, had accompanied her fall before the deepest darkness had swallowed her up, but she had no memory of landing. Deprived of sight, she felt around to gather what she could of her surroundings, while her arms were free, her legs leaden under the sand that covered them, and she immediately began excavating herself. As she worked, the metallic tang of blood filled the air, filling her leg. She felt the warm, grating wet that could only be sand and clotting blood. Cursing under her breath, she undid her belt and cinched its cold leather just above the gouge in her calf. Feeling her way in the dark, she tore several strips of fabric from her tunic, winding it surely around the wound. If it held, her handiwork would stop the bleeding, but she had no potions to stave off infection. She would need to find a way back to her caravan soon. Still blinded by the depthless shadow around her, she exhumed her other leg and began feeling in her pack for a token Rahad had given her. Nights in the waste are deeper than Sadakol's belly, he'd said. When you lose yourself, pray to Tall Papa and he will show you the way. Her fingers closed around the tiny coin, pulling it from its hiding place. She closed her eyes and mouthed, Raptka. Eyelids flushing coral from the sudden light, she opened them to survey the cavern sprawling out around her. Heavy stone blocks shattered from the fall lay in shards all around her. Further out, enormous pillars reached like trees up into the darkness, casting long shadows out into the black. Looking up, her breath caught in her throat as the bright eyes and more of the Lamia gaped out at her from the dark. Though unmoving, Rahad's sword still embedded in its skull, it was 100 heartbeats before she could look away. Still recovering from the shock, she resumed her search and found several long hooked spears scattered about the sand. Taking one up, she grabbed hold of her pack and slid down the lonely dune. Boots met stone, and she braced her spear against one of the mighty pillars. Using it to steady herself, she stood upright. She took a moment to test her wounded leg. When it became clear it would not fail her, she gathered up her pack, dusted herself off, and struck out into the darkness. In the deep quiet, muffled by the vast expanse of nothing reaching out around her, her passage was marked only by a steady staccato of steel on stone. And finally, the Death Blow of Abernanit, by Anonymous. Broken battlements and wrecked walls, where worship of the horror once embraced, the bites of 50 winters, frost and wind, have cracked and pitted the unholy gates, and brought down the cruel, obscene spire. All is dust, all is nothing more than dust. The blood has dried and screams have echoed out, framed by hills in the wildest, forlorn place of Morrowind, sits the barren bones of Abernanit. When thrice-blessed Rangadil first saw Abernanit, it burnished silver bright with power and permanence, a dreadful place with dreadful men to guard it. With fever-glassed eyes and strength through the horror, Rangadil saw the foe's number was far greater than the few ordinators and buoyant armigers he led. Watching from the hills above, the field and castle of death, while it stood, it damned the souls of the people of Morrowind, accursed, iniquitous Castle Abernanit. The alarum was sounded. calling the holy warriors to battle, to answer villainy shield with justice's spear, to steel themselves to fight at the front and be brave. Rangadil too grasped his shield and his thin ebon spear, and the clamour of battle began with a resounding crash. To shake the clouds down from the sky, the shield wall was smashed and blood staunched the ground of the field, a battle like no other, of Morrowind, to destroy the evil of Abernanit. The maniacal horde was skilled at arms for seats, but the three holy fists of Mother, Lord, and Wizard pushed the monster's army back in charge after charge. Rangadil saw from above, urging the armor to defend Dagoth Thras himself in the pernicious tower spire, and knew that only when the heart of evil was caught would the land ever be truly saved. He pledged then by the temple and the holy tribunal of Morrowind to take the tower of Abernanit. In a violent push, the tower base was pierced, but all efforts to fell the spire came to naught, as if all the strength of the horror held that one tower. The stairwell up was steep and so tight that two warriors could not ascend it side by side, so single file the army clambered up and up to take the tower room and end the reign of one of the cruelest petty tyrants in the annals of Morrowind, Dagoth Thras of Abernanit. They awaited a victory cry from the first to scale the tower, but silence only returned, and then the blood, first only a rivulet and then a scarlet course, poured down the steep stairwell with a cry from above. Dagoth Thras is besting our army one by one! Rangadil called his army back, every ordinator and buoyant armiger, and he himself ascended the stairs, passing the bloody remains of the best warriors of Morrowind to the tower room of Abernanit. Like a raven of death on its eyrie was Dagoth Thras, holding bloody shield and bloody blade at the tower room door. Every thrust of Rangadil's spear was blocked with ease. Every slash of Rangadil's blade was deflected away. Every blow of Rangadil's mace was met by the shield. Every quick arrow shot could find no purchase. For the monster's greatest power was in his dread blessing that no weapon from no warrior found in all of Morrowind could pass the shield of Abernanit. As hour passed hour, Rangadil came to understand how his greatest warriors met their end with Dagoth Thras, for he could exhaust them by blocking their attacks, and then, thus weakened, they were simply cut down. The villain was patient and skilled with the shield, and Rangadil felt even his own mighty arms growing numb. While Dagoth Thras anticipated and blocked each cut, and Rangadil feared that without the blessing of the Divine Three of Morrowind, he'd die in the Tower of Abernanit. But he still poured down blows as he yelled, "Foe, I am Rangadil, a prince of the true temple, and I've fought in many a battle, and many a warrior has tried to stop my blade and has failed. Very few can anticipate which blow I am planning, and fewer, knowing that, know how to arrest the design, or have the strength to absorb all of my strikes. There is no greater master of shield blocking in all of Morrowind than here in the castle Abernanit. My foe, Dark Lord Dagoth Thras, before you slay me, I beg you, tell me how you know how to block." Wickedly proud, Dagoth Thras heard Rangadil's plea, and decided that before he gutted the temple champion, he would deign to give him some knowledge for the afterlife. How his instinct and reflexes worked as he started to explain, he realized that he did not how he did it, and watched puzzled as Rangadil delivered what the tales of Morrowind called the Death Blow of Abernanit. Although it has been some time, I appreciate you stopping by for another episode. I always enjoy reading these books to you, and I will not stop anytime soon. Expect more of these in the future. Thank you for joining me. Take care.